A 7-year-old girl walked into a Korean Mafia boss's restaurant in the middle of a rainstorm and whispered 4 words that changed both their lives forever. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he'd done. She only knew he looked strong enough to stop what was coming through that door. Outside, 3 armed men were already stepping out of a black SUV. Inside, Ha-yeol, the most feared crime boss in South Gyeongsang, had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether a child lived or died. He chose, and nothing was ever the same again.
If you're watching this, like, comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Welcome to K-Drama Afro Tales. Let's begin.
The rain came down mean that night. Not the soft, forgiving kind that washes things clean. The kind that punishes. It hammered the pavement along the old market street near Jinjuseong Fortress in sheets so thick the neon signs bled color across the asphalt like open wounds. Red, blue, gold. Jinju at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in November looked like the inside of a dream nobody wanted to be having. Delivery scooters cutting through standing water. A drunk man arguing with a parking meter 2 blocks down. A woman in a convenience store uniform pulling a plastic bag over her head and running for her car. Ha-yeol noticed all of it through the window. He noticed everything. That was the habit of a man who had survived 41 years in circumstances that killed people with far better instincts than his. He sat alone in the 3rd booth from the back at Namgang Sikdang, a restaurant on the ground floor of a building he owned through 4 layers of shell companies. The place was small, 14 tables, soft overhead light the color of warm paper. The smell of doenjang jjigae and grilled mackerel and the pine-based floor cleaner the owner, Mrs. Yong, used every night before close. Yeol had been coming here for 11 years. He came when he needed to think without anyone waiting for an answer from him. He came when the syndicate business got loud inside his skull and he needed a room that expected nothing. Tonight he had a cup of barley tea going cold in front of him, and a problem he had not yet found the language for. 3 weeks ago, a shipment had gone wrong at the port of Busan. Not gone wrong in the ordinary sense. Cargo misrouted, paperwork delayed, a bribe that didn't hold. Gone wrong in the sense that 2 of his men had turned up dead in a container yard with official evidence markers already on the scene before his people even knew there was a body to collect. Someone with real authority had moved faster than the Jinyong group. That had never happened before. Not once in 11 years. Yeol turned the barley teacup in his hands. His fingers were thick, the knuckles of his right hand slightly misaligned from a break that had healed badly when he was 22, and nobody had bothered to set the bone properly. He had 2 rings on his left hand, one a plain titanium band, one with a white tiger carved into onyx. The left hand was the hand he thought with. The right was the hand he worked with. He kept them separate in his mind. It helped. The restaurant was down to its last 2 tables of customers. A couple in the far corner splitting a bottle of macchiali, talking in low voices, probably married but not to each other. An older man at the counter eating alone and reading something on his phone with reading glasses pushed down his nose. Mrs. Yong moved behind the kitchen pass-through, the sounds of final cleanup beginning, the flat clatter of metal bowls being stacked, the hiss of the industrial sprayer. Yeol was thinking about the evidence marker, about the specific code sequence on the tag, which his people had photographed before anyone arrived. He'd had a former investigator run the code quietly. What came back was a task force designation he didn't recognize, not one of the standard units that worked the port. Not customs. Not the Coast Guard's investigative branch. A designation that technically didn't exist in the public record. That was the problem he didn't have language for yet. The shape of something he couldn't see clearly enough to name. The restaurant door opened. He didn't look up immediately. He registered it, the wet rush of cold air, the brief increase in rain sound, and kept his eyes on the table. His peripheral vision would tell him what he needed. It usually did. What it told him was small. Very small. Not adult small. Child small. He looked up. She was maybe 6, maybe 7. Hard to tell under the oversized red rain slicker that hung past her knees and dripped steadily onto Mrs. Yang's clean floor. The hood had fallen back. Her hair was in braids, tight, neat braids that someone had done carefully, some of them decorated with small beads, and the rain had soaked through so water ran in thin lines down her temples and the back of her neck. She was dark-skinned, black, with wide-set eyes doing the work of taking in an entire room at once with the particular rapid focus of a child who has been trained to assess exits. Not by instinct, by instruction. That was the first thing that stopped him. The way she looked at the room. That wasn't a lost child's panic. That was a taught behavior. She was alone. He looked past her through the front window. Rain on the street. A black SUV idling at the curb on the far side. Headlights on, engine running, visible through the rain-smeared glass as a soft blur of yellow-white light. Could be nothing. Could be a car waiting for a fare. Could be exactly what his gut was already telling him it was, which was not that. The girl had spotted him. He didn't know why she fixed on him specifically. Maybe it was the booth position, back wall, clear sightlines to both the door and the kitchen exit. Maybe it was that he was the only person in the room sitting alone and still. Maybe it was something she'd been told to look for and he happened to fit the description. He'd never know exactly. She walked toward him. Not ran, walked. 7 years old, soaking wet, alone in a restaurant at 11 at night in the rain. And she walked toward him with her chin slightly up and her jaw slightly set, which was the face of someone trying very hard not to show how scared they were. Yul had worn that face himself for the better part of a decade when he was coming up in the syndicate. He recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting. She stopped at the edge of his booth. Water dripped from the hem of the rain slicker onto the floor. She looked up at him. Her eyes were brown, very dark, with that wet brightness that comes right before tears that the person is refusing to let fall. She leaned forward on her toes and whispered, close enough that he could smell rain and something sugary. A child's smell? Fruit candy or juice? Please pretend to be my dad. Yul held very still. In the years that followed, when he turned this moment over in his mind, and he would turn it over many times, he was never able to fully explain what happened in the 2 seconds after she said those words. He was not a sentimental man. He had done things that precluded sentimentality as a serious option. He had ordered men hurt. He had moved money that destroyed communities. He had looked the other way on things that, if examined in the daylight, he could not have looked at for long. He had built something powerful, and he had built it out of materials that left marks on the hands. And in 2 seconds he looked at this child and made a calculation that was not, in any way he could honestly account for, a calculation at all. It was something more basic. Something that worked faster than thought. He looked back toward the window. The black SUV was still there. While he was watching, the front passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Then the rear door. 2 more men. All 3 wore dark clothing, nothing remarkable, the kind of nothing remarkable that was its own kind of remarkable if you knew what to look for. They moved without hesitation across the wet sidewalk toward the restaurant entrance. Purposeful, spread apart just slightly. Not the natural clustering of civilians, the deliberate spacing of men who'd been trained not to bunch up in a breach situation. Yul looked back at the girl. He looked at her braids, the beads. He was looking for something specific now because his mind had already assembled a partial picture and it was pointing at one thing in particular, and he needed to confirm it before he did anything else. His eyes moved over the beads. Some plastic, some wood, a few metallic-looking ones. And then he found it. 3rd braid on the left, near the base, a bead slightly heavier looking than the others, titanium finish, slightly larger diameter, the kind of size and weight that could house, say, a low-frequency GPS transmitter the size of a watch battery. They'd been tracking her, and she'd walked into a restaurant, which meant they knew exactly where she was. Yul slid out of the booth. He didn't make a production of it. He just moved smooth and unhurried, came around to her side, and sat back down in the seat across from where he'd been, so that now he was between her and the front door, and she was against the wall on the inside of the booth. He did not touch her. He put his menu in front of her. "Sit down," he said. His voice was low, level, no drama in it. "Can you eat?" She climbed into the booth without being told twice. He raised 2 fingers toward Mrs. Yang's direction without looking. The universal sign for more of whatever's easiest. Mrs. Yang had known him long enough to understand he was signaling something other than hunger, but she was also the kind of woman who had survived enough complicated situations to know that what you do in those moments is keep moving, keep your face neutral, and bring the food. The front door opened. The 3 men came in. Cold air again, louder rain for a moment, then the door swinging shut. Yul had his phone on the table and his eyes on it, the posture of a man mildly distracted by a screen. In his peripheral vision he tracked them. Two staying near the entrance, one moving slowly into the room, scanning. The scanner was good. He moved casually, hands loose, but his eyes weren't casual. They were cutting the room in a grid pattern, moving from face to face. He was looking for the girl, which meant he hadn't spotted her yet, which meant Yul's body was blocking her from the initial sight line from the door. Yul put his phone flat on the table. "What's your name?" he said quietly. She looked at him over the top of the menu, which she was holding up, maybe hiding behind it, maybe pretending to read it. Hard to tell with a 7-year-old. "Iamide," she said. "How old are you, Iamide?" 7.5. "Okay, Iamide, I'm going to need you to do something for me. I need you to look at the menu and not look toward the door. Can you do that?" She lowered the menu half an inch and looked at him with an expression that was, despite everything, slightly evaluating, sizing him up. "Are those the monsters?" she said. He blinked. "My dad said if bad people came, they'd look like regular people, but move like monsters." Yul processed that. "Your dad's smart," he said. "Was." That one syllable landed like a stone dropped into still water. He watched her face when she said it. The slight flicker, the press of her lips together, the controlled way she dropped her eyes back to the menu, and he understood several things at once, none of them good. "Don't look up," he said. He pulled out his phone under the table, where the screen wasn't visible to the room, opened a contact labeled in Korean characters that translated roughly to building manager, and typed a 4-character code. The code meant back exit now, standing by. The response came in 11 seconds. A single character confirmed. The scanner had completed his first pass of the room and was now making a second, slower one. He was going to reach the back booths in about 40 seconds. At this distance, in this light, with Yul's body position, he might miss Iamide for another pass. That wasn't a margin Yul was interested in working with. Mrs. Yang appeared at the booth with a bowl of mook and a small plate of banchan. Yul looked up at her. "The back," he said in Korean. "Just that." Mrs. Yang looked at him for exactly 1 second, then looked at the small girl in the rain slicker, and nodded once and walked back toward the kitchen without changing her pace. Yul stood up. He put 200,000 won on the table, significantly more than anything that had been ordered, and put his hand briefly on the back of Iamide's booth, not touching her, just a presence. "Okay, Iamide, we're going to walk to the kitchen. You're going to hold my hand, and you're going to keep talking to me about anything. What's your favorite animal?" She slid out of the booth. He watched her reach up and take his hand, small fingers wrapping around his damaged knuckles, not hesitating, just taking the hand like it was a fact. And something shifted in his chest that he didn't have a name for and didn't try to name right then. "Elephants," she said. "Because they remember everything." "Good choice," he said, and walked her toward the kitchen. They made it through the kitchen door before the scanner finished his third pass. The kitchen was hot and smelled of rendered fat and garlic and the chemical edge of industrial soap. Mrs. Yang's 2 cooks had already moved to the far side of the space, not watching, not asking. Mrs. Yang stood at the rear exit door, which opened onto a narrow service alley. She had Iamide's hand for exactly the 3 seconds it took to pass her through the doorway, and then Yul was through and the door was closing behind them. The alley was dark and wet and smelled of grease trap and rain-soaked cardboard. A black car was idling 30 feet to the left, its exhaust rising in the cold air. Behind the wheel was a man named Nam Ji-hoon, who had been with Yul for 9 years and had the particular quality of silence that made him excellent at situations that required not talking. Yul opened the rear door. "Get in," he said to Iamide. She got in without asking where they were going. He registered the fact that a 7-year-old in a crisis was operating on pure trust extended to a stranger because she had nothing else available. And he registered what that meant about what she'd already been through tonight before she ever walked into that restaurant. He got in the front. "Go," he said to Ji-hoon. The car pulled out of the alley. He turned around as they hit the street. Through the rear window he could see the front of Namgang Sikdang, the lights, the neon, and the three men who had come back outside now and were standing on the sidewalk, one of them with a phone to his ear, all three looking up and down the street with the controlled urgency of people who could not afford to look urgent in public. They hadn't run. They'd stayed controlled. That told him something. These were not street-level operators. These were people with training and, more importantly, the discipline to absorb a miss and adjust rather than break formation. That was a different order of problem than he'd initially been working with, when they were just three men stepping out of an SUV. He turned back around. They were moving toward the river road now. The rain still heavy, streetlights smearing across the wet windshield. "Iamide," he said. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as best you can. Can you do that?" She was in the middle of the back seat, the rain slicker still dripping, her hands folded in her lap. Her feet didn't reach the floor. She was looking at the back of his seat, and then she looked up and met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes," she said. "Where's your father right now?" The look in her eyes changed. Something shifted behind them. Not collapse, not tears, but something older and heavier than a 7-year-old should have been carrying around in her face. "He told me to run," she said. "He said if they came to the apartment, I should take my bag and run and find someone strong." "When did he tell you that?" "A long time ago. Months. He practiced with me." She paused. "He said he would find me after. He said he always finds me." Another pause. "He didn't answer his phone." Yul kept his face even. "How many times did you call?" "A lot." "Okay." He looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon had the particular quality of seeming not to have heard anything while clearly having heard everything. "We're going to the station house," Yul said. Ji-hoon nodded. Yul turned back to look at Iamide through the mirror. "You said you have a bag." "The backpack." She had it in her lap. He'd seen it when she'd settled into the seat. A small child's backpack, dark blue, with what looked like a cartoon elephant on the front pocket. She looked down at it and then back up at him. "My dad packed it," she said. "He said not to let anyone take it." "I'm not going to take it, but I need to know what's in it. Will you tell me?" She thought about this with a seriousness that he found, in some corner of himself he hadn't used in a long time, remarkable, a 7-year-old parsing trustworthiness in real time. "Pictures," she said finally. "Papers. And a note from my dad." "Okay," he said. "Don't open it yet. Wait until we're somewhere safe." "Are you going to keep me safe?" He looked at her in the mirror. Her braids were still damp, her face still holding that controlled expression that was the shape of a child imitating adult composure and mostly succeeding through sheer will. "Yes," he said. He did not add qualifiers. He did not say "I'll try," or "I'll do my best," or any of the hedging language adults use to give themselves room to fail without being held accountable for it. He just said yes, and he said it the way he said things when he meant them completely, which was quietly, without performance. She looked at him for another moment and then looked out the window at the rain. The station house was a property just past the city limits, a 3-bedroom on a quiet residential block that the Jinyong Group used as a layover safe house, maintained by a rotating team of 2, always stocked, never in Yul's name on any document that existed. The neighborhood was quiet, close enough to the coast that you could smell salt in the air even on a rainy night. The house had a detached carport, which is where Ji-hoon pulled in, cutting the headlights before turning into the driveway. Inside, the house was warm, clean. Whoever had been through on the last rotation had left it in order. Dishes put away, heat on a timer, a bowl of apples on the kitchen counter that were 2 days old but still fine. Iamide stood in the kitchen and looked around with the systematic attention she'd given the restaurant. "You can take your raincoat off," Yul said. "There's a bathroom down the hall. There are towels." She looked at him. "Will you wait here?" "Yes." She disappeared down the hall. He heard the bathroom door close and then the sound of water running. And he stood in the kitchen and thought for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds of raw, uninterrupted thinking that he allowed himself because he had a habit of not starting problems until he understood their shape. Then he took out his phone. He made 3 calls. The first to his operations director, a man named Yang Dae-sung, waking him. He told Dae-sung to find out everything that could be found in the next 90 minutes about a journalist named Adewale Adeyemi. Address, employer, current status, most recent activity. He did not explain why. Dae-sung didn't ask. The second call was to his head of security, a woman named Baek Sua, to have a full team move to the station house without sirens or spectacle within the hour. The third call was to a man who did certain technical work for the syndicate and who he reached on a number that changed monthly. He told this man he needed to sweep for a GPS transmission source on a small metallic bead, approximately 8 millimeters diameter, titanium casing, possibly military grade. "Bring it to me tomorrow," the tech man said. "I need it in 2 hours, Yul said. Brief pause. "Then bring it here." Yul hung up. He set the phone on the counter and found a glass and filled it with water and drank it standing at the sink, looking at the rain against the kitchen window. Imide came back. She had taken the rain slicker off. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and jeans and small sneakers, and someone had clearly dressed her in a hurry, because the shirt was on inside out. She dried her face, and her braids were still damp, but she tried to straighten them with her fingers. She still had the backpack on. She sat down at the kitchen table. "Are you hungry?" he said. She thought about it, which meant she probably was, but had learned to be uncertain about saying so. "Maybe," she said. He found bread and peanut butter in the cabinet. The house was stocked for function, not cuisine, and he made her a sandwich without asking further. He put it in front of her and found a juice box in the refrigerator from a case someone had stocked at some point, and put that down too. She ate with the focused efficiency of a child who was hungrier than maybe had suggested. While she ate, he sat across from her and didn't push anything. After a few minutes, she put the sandwich down and looked at him. "My dad said I should only trust someone if they do something before they explain why," she said. "You got me out before you asked me anything." He nodded. "My dad's like that too. He does things first." Past tense again. He noticed she was slipping between tenses. Said, does the way people do when they know something but haven't let themselves land on it yet. He didn't correct it. "What does your dad do?" he asked. "He writes stories," she said, "about when bad people do bad things and nobody's supposed to know. He says somebody has to write it down." "A journalist?" "Yes. He works for a newspaper, but also he does his own research. He calls it the important work." She reached for the juice box. He said the story he was working on was the most important one he'd ever found. He was scared about it. She looked up. "My dad doesn't scare easy." "No," Yul said. "I don't think he does." He said kids were disappearing. Iamide said he said the people who were supposed to find them were actually the ones hiding them. She said it with the flat, factual delivery of a child repeating something exactly as it was told to her, without yet having the framework to fully understand what it meant. He said it went all the way to the top. He said that's why it was so dangerous. Yul was quiet for a moment. In his chest, something was settling into place the way a joint settles when it's been slightly dislocated and then suddenly isn't. A click, a pressure releasing, a new clarity. The port, the dead men, the evidence marker with the designation that didn't officially exist. The black SUV tracking a 7-year-old across Jeonju on a Wednesday night in the rain. He reached across the table. "Iamide, I need to look at your braids for a moment. I'm going to touch them. Okay? I'll be careful." She tilted her head toward him without pulling back. He moved carefully through the braids with 2 fingers, searching by touch now that he could confirm by direct contact. He found the bead in 11 seconds. It felt exactly as he'd assessed it. Slightly heavier than the decorative beads around it, the texture of the surface slightly different, a faint seam running along the midline where 2 casing halves had been joined. He did not remove it yet. That required proper tools and a specific technique. If you just pulled it, you could crack the casing and trigger an emergency transmission. He had a man for this. "There's something in one of your beads," he said. "A small device that lets people know where you are." She went very still. "That's how they found me." "Yes. My dad put it there," she said. Then, after a beat, "to keep track of me in case something happened." Then, after another beat, quieter. He didn't think about them getting it. "He couldn't have known everything," Yul said. He kept his voice level, not reassuring. He had a distrust of false reassurance, just factual. "He thought it was for your protection." He was trying to protect you. She was quiet. What was in the note he put in your bag? Yul asked. I haven't read it yet. She looked down at the backpack in her lap. I was scared to. You don't have to read it right now. She was quiet for another moment. Then she unzipped the front pocket of the backpack and reached in and produced a folded piece of paper. Regular paper folded into quarters. She didn't unfold it. She held it in both hands and looked at it. He has bad handwriting, she said. He always makes me read his notes because I can read his writing better than anyone. She pressed her lips together. The controlled look was harder to hold now. Her chin was doing something. A slight quiver she was fighting by setting her jaw. He used to say I was his best editor. Yul waited. She unfolded the note. Her eyes moved across it, slow at first, then faster. He watched her face, watched the way she read it, the way a person reads something they need to absorb completely before they let themselves respond to it. When she finished, she folded it again carefully along the same creases. She looked up at him. He says your name will be on the side of the memory chip, she said. He says to find the strongest person who does things first and trusts them with the chip. She swallowed. He says he loves me. Pause. He says he'll find me. The present tense. She'd read it in the present tense. He let it stay there. What memory chip? He said. The bead, she said. He says the bead isn't just a tracker. He says the tracker is the cover. The bead is a chip with everything on it. She looked at him with those very dark, very steady eyes. He says it'll make sense to the right person. Yul sat back. He thought about the implications of what she'd just told him for approximately 4 seconds, which was enough time for the picture to rearrange itself considerably. A journalist investigating what sounded like a large-scale trafficking operation. Running his own encryption, hiding evidence in his daughter's hair. Not because he didn't have safer options, because he knew that if things went wrong, the only person they wouldn't immediately search was a 7-year-old in a rain slicker. Adewale Adeyemi had been very, very smart. And Yul suspected very, very dead. He didn't say that last part. He kept it behind his face where it belonged for now. Okay, he said. I'm going to need to bring someone in tomorrow to take the bead out of your hair without breaking it. It'll take about 15 minutes and it won't hurt. Can you do that? Yes, she said. He said, tonight you're going to sleep here. There's a bedroom down the hall. My people will be outside. He paused. You're safe tonight. I give you my word. She looked at him for a long moment. What's your name? She said. He hesitated. In his life, his name functioned as a warning or a currency. It was rarely just a name. To this child it would mean neither of those things, and he found, surprisingly, that he wanted it to mean neither. Yul, he said. She tried it. Yul. The pronunciation was close. Is that a Korean name? Yes. My dad knows a lot of Korean people. He says Korea has good food and complicated history. She said it with the cadence of someone quoting. Then he's right about the food. He is, Yul said. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and climbed down from the chair with the backpack. She stopped at the kitchen doorway and turned back. Yul, she said. Did you decide to help me because you're a good person? He looked at her. He didn't lie to children as a rule. Not the kind of clean lie that patches over a difficult truth. He thought about what he actually was, what the Jinyang group actually was, what his hands had actually done. I don't know if I'm a good person, he said. But I decided to help you. She considered this with the same seriousness she'd considered the sandwich. Okay, she said. That's enough. She went to bed. He sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time after that, listening to the rain slow and then stop, listening to the silence of the house settling around him, listening to the particular quality of quiet that a sleeping child produces, a weight of trust placed without negotiation, an expectation of safety assumed without evidence. His phone buzzed at 1:47 a.m. It was Daesung. Yul read the message once. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at his hands, the left with its rings, the right with its crooked knuckle, and he stayed very still for a moment, in the way he stayed still when something required the full weight of his attention. Adewale Adeyemi, 38 years old, an investigative correspondent for an English-language paper based in Busan, had been found in his car in a parking structure in the Nampodong district at 10:14 p.m. A single gunshot wound, no witnesses. The car was already surrounded by 2 units of local police and 2 unmarked government vehicles by the time the first call came in, which meant, as Dae-sung's message noted with the precise neutrality of a man who understood implications, that someone with real authority had been notified before the first emergency call. Yul thought about a girl who kept slipping between tenses when she talked about her father. He thought about a note that said, "He'll find me." He thought about what it was going to cost him to do what he was already certain he was going to do. Then he stopped thinking about the cost. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Dae-sung," he said when it connected. "I need everything you have on a task force with a non-public designation. They're operating out of the port." He paused. "And I need you to find out who signs their funding." "That's going to take time," Dae-sung said. "I have some," Yul said. "Not much." He hung up. Down the hall, behind a closed door, a 7-year-old girl named Ayamide Adeyemi was sleeping in a safe house belonging to one of the most dangerous men in South Gyeongsang. In her braids, nestled among the beads her father had placed there with careful hands, was a titanium capsule containing evidence that had already gotten 1 man killed and was about to bring down something so large that neither of them, not the crime boss nor the sleeping child, could yet see its full shape from where they were standing. Yul turned off the kitchen light. He sat in the dark and waited for morning. And somewhere in the back of his mind, moving slow and quiet, like something that had been underground a long time and was only just beginning to surface, a question was forming that he didn't yet have the words for. Something about what a man owes the world when he has taken more from it than he has given, and whether the debt can be settled in a single act, or whether it has to be paid in the long grinding way, day after day, choice after choice, until either the debt is gone or the man is. He didn't answer it. Not yet. But the question stayed. The tech man's name was Moon Hyun-suk, and he worked out of a converted repair shop in Jeonju's Chojangdong district that smelled permanently of solder flux and machine oil and the particular chemical sweetness of circuit board cleaner. He was 44 years old and had 3 fingers missing on his right hand from an incident 11 years ago that he did not discuss. And he was the best electronic forensics person Yul had ever worked with, which was why Yul had kept him alive and employed and occasionally annoyed for the better part of a decade. They arrived at the shop at 6:47 in the morning. Ayamide had slept 4 hours. Yul had slept none. Hyun-suk looked at the girl, looked at Yul, looked back at the girl and said nothing. He pulled a stool up to his workbench and gestured for her to sit. And when she climbed onto it and tilted her head toward him with the cooperative patience of a child, who had been through enough that a stranger looking at her braids barely registered on her alarm scale, he put on a magnifying headset and went to work. Took 9 minutes. He used a pair of fine-tipped ceramic forceps he'd made himself and a releasing solvent on a cotton swab barely the size of a pencil eraser. When the bead came free, he held it up in the light between 2 fingers and turned it slowly. "Military grade," he said. "GPS plus secondary frequency. Whoever built this had access to supply chains that aren't commercial." He set it on a small rubber mat. "The GPS I can kill in 30 seconds. The secondary I'll need to analyze before I touch it." "Kill the GPS first," Yul said. Hyun-suk did it in 22 seconds. "The secondary?" Yul said. "It's also carrying data." Hyun-suk looked at him over the magnifying headset. "How much data?" "I don't know yet." Hyun-suk turned the bead over again. He ran a thumbnail along the seam Yul had detected the night before, and his expression shifted into the focused, slightly hungry look he got when something technically interesting presented itself. "The casing's a 2-part press fit. There's a micro USB port inside if I'm reading the seam geometry right." He looked up. "What format?" "Encrypted," Yul said. "I don't know the cipher." "Do you want to know the cipher? Or do you want what's inside?" "What's inside?" "Then give me 2 hours." Yul looked at Ayamide. She had been following the conversation with close attention. "You okay?" he said. "It didn't hurt," she said, which answered a question he hadn't asked, which meant she'd been worried about it and was relieved and was now filing it away and moving forward. He was developing a certain appreciation for the speed with which she processed and moved. He found her a chair in the corner of the shop near a space heater and a stack of old car magazines she couldn't possibly have been interested in, but which she flipped through methodically while Hyun-suk worked, giving each page approximately 4 seconds of attention, the way a person reads when their mind is somewhere else entirely and the reading is just something to do with the hands. Yul stood near the shop's side window and watched the street. His phone had been producing a steady stream of messages since 5 a.m. His operations director, his security head, 2 of his council members who had caught wind that something was happening and wanted to know what. He answered none of them. He was still thinking. At 7:23 his phone rang. Not a message, an actual call, which Dae-sung only did when text was insufficient. He picked up. "Talk," he said. "The task force designation," Dae-sung said. He sounded like a man who had also not slept. "I found it. It's buried, but it's there. Joint Government Initiative, officially under the umbrella of the Ministry of Justice's Human Trafficking Response Division. Been active 7 years. The public record shows a standard mandate investigating trafficking networks through port cargo chains. And the non-public record is what's interesting." Yul could hear Dae-sung pulling something up on a keyboard. The funding chain is clean on the surface, standard appropriations, but 2 layers down there are discretionary line items that route through a national security budget category that doesn't get standard oversight review, which means whoever runs it answers to himself, Yul said. "Effectively. And the name at the top of the internal command structure, not the public face, the actual operational authority." Dae-sung paused. Ko Won-sik, Deputy Director, Office of Strategic Coordination. He's been in law enforcement 31 years, built his career on anti-trafficking work. He's got a wall full of commendations, 3 honorary degrees, testified before the National Assembly 4 times on the trafficking crisis. Yul was quiet. He's also, Dae-sung said, on the guest list for 2 events this year, hosted by the Port Authority Board of Directors, one of which was a closed dinner. 7 attendees. Find out who else was at that dinner. Already working on it. Yul. Dae-sung paused again, which was unusual. Dae-sung did not pause for effect. When he paused it was because he was calculating whether to say something. This is government level. This is not the kind of thing I know what it is. Our business depends on a certain equilibrium with the authorities. Dae-sung. Yes. A child's father was shot in a parking structure last night. She's 7 years old. She's sitting 10 feet from me looking at pictures of cars she can't drive. He kept his voice flat. Find out who was at the dinner. Dae-sung said nothing for a moment. Then, yes, okay. Yul hung up. He turned away from the window. Across the shop, Baek Sua had arrived without him hearing her, which was both her greatest professional attribute and occasionally irritating. She was 37, compact, and wore her black hair pulled back with the functional indifference of someone who had stopped thinking about it years ago. She stood just inside the shop's rear door with her arms crossed and her eyes moving between Yul and the girl in the corner with the car magazines. And her expression was a specific kind of careful that Yul had learned to read as her doing arithmetic she hadn't finished yet. He walked to her. Talk, he said, quieter now. The 3 men from last night, she said. I pulled the SUV's plate. Rental. Cash transaction. False ID. Good. False ID, not street level. The rental location is an airport counter that has government account billing set up for law enforcement vehicle use. She met his eyes. The false ID was used to avoid the account trace, but the vehicle itself came out of an allocation pool flagged in our customs contacts as associated with one specific task force. She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. They know she's gone, Yul said. They know she's gone. They don't know where she is yet. The GPS went offline. She glanced at Hyun-suk's workbench. Presumably just now. When it went offline, they'll run a last known location query. It'll put her at the restaurant. Mrs. Yang. I already sent 2 people. She's fine. She says 3 men came back in after you left. Asked if she'd seen a little girl. She said no. They left. She didn't push anything. Sua paused. She also said to tell you she's charging you for the table you abandoned. Tell her I'll pay double. I already told her that. Sua looked at Iamide again. The arithmetic was still running in her face. Yul, what are we doing here? It was not a question. It was the beginning of a conversation he'd known was coming. What we're doing, he said, is looking at what's on that chip, and after that we decide the next step. Sua looked at him steadily. The council is going to want a meeting. The council can want whatever they like. That's not. She stopped, recalibrated. Jang Byung-cheol called me at 6 this morning. He wants to know if the girl is connected to the port situation. Yul felt something tighten in his jaw. How does Jang know about the girl? He doesn't know specifics. He knows you left a restaurant last night with an unidentified package and went dark from communications for several hours. He's drawing inferences. Tell Jang I'll speak to him this afternoon. He's not going to like. I didn't ask what he'd like. He was quiet for a moment. She had the kind of face that didn't reveal much when she decided to keep it closed, but he'd worked with her long enough to read the things around the edges, the slight set of her mouth, the way she breathed through her nose when she was controlling a response. She was controlling one now. Say it. This is not our fight, she said. The port situation is our problem because it affects our operations. A task force playing both sides of the trafficking trade, that's information we could use. It's leverage. It's a negotiating position. But you're talking about taking it somewhere else. You're talking about using it against them. That's not leverage. That's a war we did not vote to start. She kept her voice very even. The council has a voice in wars. The council has a voice in syndicate business, Yul said. This is not syndicate business. Then what is it? He looked at her. She looked back. Her eyes were very direct and slightly cold. Not because she was a cold person, but because she'd learned that in certain conversations with certain men, warmth was a concession she couldn't afford. It's mine, he said simply. She held the look for another 3 seconds. Then she dropped it, not in defeat, in the particular way of someone who knows when a decision has already been made and arguing further is spending resources on a fixed point. Okay, she said. Keep the council quiet until this afternoon, and I need a second location. Not the station house. Somewhere further out. How far? Far enough that if someone runs a net across the province, they're not in it. He nodded once. She was already reaching for her phone. Got it open, Hyun-suk called from the workbench. Yul crossed the shop. The beads sat on the rubber mat. Its two casing have separated. The interior visible under Hyun-suk's magnifying light. A chip the size of a thumbnail, matte black, with a micro-connector along one edge. Hyun-suk had it connected to a purpose-built reader he'd assembled from what appeared to be 3 different devices. His screen showed a directory. Yul looked at it. The files were organized by date going back 14 months, folders labeled with what appeared to be shipping manifest reference codes. Inside the top-level directory, a subfolder labeled secondary, and inside that 3 items, a video file, an audio file, and a document simply labeled red. Open the document, Yul said. Hyun-suk opened it. It was a letter, not formal. A personal letter, handwritten and then photographed, the image clear enough to read every word. Yul read it standing over Hyun-suk's shoulder, and he read it carefully, the way he read things that required him to understand not just what was said but what the person was like when they wrote it. Adiwale Adeyemi had been meticulous and terrified and very, very clear-headed. The letter laid out in plain sequential language the full shape of what he'd found, the task force's dual function, the cargo routing system embedded inside legitimate port operations, the network of shell organizations receiving payment for what the manifest described as logistics consulting. Children moved as freight. Documented. Photographed. The photographs were in the dated folders. Adiwale had written, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I'm sorry about that. I tried to find a way to finish this without that happening. I don't think I succeeded. What matters now is that Iamide is safe and that this information reaches someone who can use it without being killed for it. I've thought hard about who that person could be. I kept coming back to the same answer. Someone who operates outside the system they're trying to take down. Someone who has their own power. Someone who has reason to want this particular machine broken. If you're reading this and you fit that description, please. She trusted you enough to give you this. Honor that." At the bottom of the letter, in different handwriting, A child's handwriting, slightly crooked, the letters large and careful, were 4 words. Please help my dad. Yul straightened up. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. His right hand was at his side, and he was aware of it. The crooked knuckle, the weight of it, the things it had done. He was also aware, in the way that happens when something you've kept at a distance suddenly closes the gap, of a feeling he couldn't categorize cleanly. It sat between rage and grief and something older than both of them, something that didn't have a clean name in Korean or English. Behind him he heard a small sound and turned. Iamide was standing 4 feet away. She'd put the car magazine down. She was looking at the screen. She could read. She'd read fast. Her face was completely still in the way a face goes completely still when it's working very hard to contain something that wants to come apart at the seams. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were at her sides. Both of them, fingers slightly curled. He knew, she said. Her voice was careful and flat and quiet. He knew this was going to happen. Yul looked at her. He practiced with me, she said. The running, finding someone. He didn't do that because he thought he might get in trouble. He did it because he knew. She swallowed. The chin quiver from the night before was there again, and again she was fighting it, and again she was mostly winning. He didn't tell me he knew. He was trying to protect you. I know that. She said it fast, not angry, but with the precision of someone who had already processed that part and was past it. I know why he did it. She stopped. Her jaw worked. He knew and he went anyway. Yes. Because he thought it was worth it. Yes. She looked at the screen, at the directory of folders, at the dates going back 14 months. 14 months of careful, meticulous, dangerous work. The shape of a man's last year. Was he right? She said. Yul looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the files, at the photographs Adewale had documented. He'd seen only the first folder, only a few images, and had looked away from those because they were not the kind of thing a person looked at for long. He thought about what was in those folders. He thought about the scope of it. He thought about the word network and what it implied, the scale, the duration, the number of people who had looked the other way, or been paid to look the other way, or been threatened into looking the other way, and the children who had moved through shipping containers while all of that looking away was happening. Yes, he said. He was right. She stood very still for another second. Then she nodded once, sharp, the kind of nod that is a door closing on a room you can't afford to stand in. She turned and walked back to her stool. She climbed onto it. She picked up the car magazine. She did not cry. Yul turned back to the screen. Hyun-suk had the presence of mind to have minimized the letter without being asked. Can you copy everything to a clean drive? Yul said. Already started, Hyun-suk said. Double redundancy always, and the original chip stays with me. He glanced at Yul sideways. You know what you're sitting on. Yes. People have died for less interesting information. I know. The people who want this back are not. Hyun-suk let it trail off. Yul looked at him. How long have you worked for me? A beat. 9 years. Have I ever put you in a situation that wasn't survivable? Hyun-suk thought about it with genuine seriousness. Twice it was close, he said. But survivable both times. He paused. Technically. Copy the files. Double redundancy. I'll need an encrypted send protocol to a destination I'll give you in an hour. Can you do that without the transmission being traced back to this location? I can route it through 4 nodes in 3 countries, Hyun-suk said. By the time anyone traces it, it'll look like it originated in Tallinn, Estonia. Do that, Yul said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Daesung. 3 lines. Dinner guest list confirmed. 7 attendees. 2 Port Authority directors, a High Court judge, 1 provincial assemblyman, and 2 private. The private names are in the system but not in any public record. One of them, Cha Young-sik, shows up in shipping records connected to 4 of the manifest codes in the journalist's files. And then a 4th line Daesung had clearly hesitated before sending Yul. Cha has a direct line to 2 members of our supply chain. If we move against this network, we will lose those lines. The council will consider that an act of financial self-destruction. Yul read the message twice. He thought about Jang Byung-cheol calling Sua at 6 in the morning. He thought about the council and the equilibrium they'd built and the money that flowed through that equilibrium, and the parts of it he'd never looked at too closely because looking too closely at the foundations of something profitable is how you end up paralyzed. He thought about a man who'd written a letter in the knowledge that he probably wasn't going to survive what he'd started. He typed back to Dae-sung. Schedule a council meeting for 4 p.m., make it mandatory, and get me a name. A prosecutor, clean, no connections to the task force or the port authority. Someone who won't run. He sent it. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at the room. Hyun-suk with his back to him, the drives duplicating. Iamide on her stool with her car magazine and her 7-year-old face doing all the quiet, ferocious work of holding something enormous at a manageable distance. Sua by the door, phone out, already arranging what needed arranging. He had a council meeting in 9 hours that was going to go badly regardless of how he played it. He had a prosecutor to identify and contact without triggering a surveillance net that was almost certainly already looking for the missing chip. He had a child who had slept 4 hours and eaten a peanut butter sandwich and read her dead father's letter with her chin up and was now pretending to read an article about a car she would not be able to drive for another 9 years. He had evidence that could dismantle a government conspiracy and also potentially take apart a significant portion of the infrastructure his syndicate depended on. He had no clean options. Every path forward cost something that couldn't be recovered. This was, he thought, what the point of no return actually felt like. Not dramatic, not loud, just the specific quiet of standing in a converted repair shop at 8 in the morning, smelling solder and machine oil, knowing that every road back had closed while he wasn't looking, and the only direction left was forward into something he couldn't see the far end of. He looked at Iamide. She looked up from the magazine, met his eyes. "Yul," she said. "Yes. My dad's not coming to find me." He held her gaze. He did not look away. He did not give her anything false to hold on to. "No," he said. She looked at him for 3 more seconds. Something moved through her face. Not breaking, not collapsing. Something more like a settling, a weight accepted rather than dropped. Then she said very quietly, "Did he stop them?" Yul looked at the copied files on Hyun-suk's screen, at 14 months of work sitting in a directory, at the thing Adewale Adeyemi had spent his last year building and hidden in his daughter's hair because he trusted that the right person would know what to do with it. He looked back at Iamide. "Not yet," he said. "But he's going to." Her eyes stayed on his. "We're going to finish it for him," Yul said. She held the look for another moment. Then she nodded, that same sharp door-closing nod, and looked back down at the magazine. Yul's phone buzzed again. He looked at it. The message was from a number he didn't recognize. Untraceable format. 7 words. "We know the chip exists. Give it back." And then, after a pause, a second message, same number. "Or we take the girl." Yul stared at the message for 4 seconds. Not long, 4 seconds was enough for his mind to run the geometry of it, the implications, the speed, the precision. Someone had tracked the GPS going offline and moved fast enough to get an untraceable message to a number that was supposed to be clean. That meant either the number had been compromised, which meant his internal communications had a leak, or they'd run a wider net than he'd estimated and caught the signal on a different thread entirely. Either option was bad. One was worse. He looked up at Sua. She read his face. "What?" He turned the phone toward her. She read it. He watched her jaw tighten by a fraction, the only external sign she permitted herself. She looked up. "How long ago did the GPS drop?" she said to Hyun-suk. 11 minutes, Hyun-suk said without turning around. 11 minutes to trace, source an untraceable line, and send. She looked at Yul. That's not reaction time. That's preparation. They had protocols in place for when the chip went dark. "Yes," Yul said. "Which means they planned for the possibility of someone pulling it." "Yes. Which means they know more about Adewale's backup system than we assumed." "Yes." He pocketed the phone. "We need to move." Sua was already at the door. "I have a location out toward Hadding. Horse property, residential, registered to a private family trust that's 11 layers removed from anything Jinyong. I've used it twice. It's clean." "How long to get there?" Hour and 10, maybe less. He turned to Hyun-suk. The drives. 3 minutes, Hyun-suk said. He was already pulling cables. Yeol crossed to Iamide. She was already standing. She'd heard the change in the room's temperature before anyone explained it to her. The slight acceleration of movement, the drop in ambient conversation. She had the backpack on. We're moving again, he said. Okay, she said. You doing all right? She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. I'm scared, she said. Just that, not as a confession, as a report. A 7-year-old giving him accurate field intelligence. That's correct, he said. Being scared right now is the right response. She absorbed this. Are you scared? He thought about lying, decided against it, same as the night before. Yes, he said. She nodded. Okay, she said again. And the word did a lot of work. It contained acknowledgement and acceptance and a kind of grim forward momentum he was starting to recognize as her fundamental operating mode. Hyun-suk handed him 2 drives. One standard black, one wrapped in a second casing of impact-resistant rubber. Yeol put one in his jacket's interior pocket and handed the other to Sua without explanation. She pocketed it without asking why. The original chip went into a small metal case the size of a matchbox that Yeol carried in the inside pocket of his jacket against his sternum. The case was lined with a signal-dampening material. Whatever frequency the chip might still be passively emitting would be contained. They were out of the shop in 4 minutes. The drive to Hadding was quiet. Iamide sat in the back between Yeol and a security operative named Jean, who had the particular quality of seeming like furniture until the moment he didn't. Jihoon drove. Sua was in a separate vehicle 30 seconds behind them, running counter-surveillance, communicating through earpiece. Yeol spent 40 minutes of the drive on his phone. The council meeting at 4 p.m. was becoming a problem he could no longer defer. Dae-sung had sent a follow-up. Jang Byung-cheol had called 2 other council members, which meant the informal alignment was already starting, which meant by 4 p.m. Yeol would not be walking into a meeting so much as walking into a verdict that had been written before he arrived. He called Dae-sung directly. The council, he said. Jang has Song Il-woo and Kwon Tae-il. 3 of the 7 voting seats, Dae-sung said. He needs 1 more for a binding motion. Who's he working on? Choi. Yeol thought about Choi, 61, the eldest on the council, had been with the syndicate since before Yeol took leadership. Careful, financially conservative, not given to loyalty as a principle so much as stability as a preference. Jang would frame this as a stability issue. What's the motion going to be? Yeol said, though he could already predict the shape of it. Based on what Jang's been saying, Dae-sung paused. Mandatory council approval for any action relating to the port situation, which, if they define the port situation broadly enough, effectively ties your hands on everything connected to this. Yes, and if I don't show for the meeting, then Jang calls it an abdication of accountability, and the motion passes by default under the bylaws. Dae-sung's voice was carefully neutral. Yeol, what do you want me to do? Yeol looked out the window. They were on the coastal highway now, the mountains on their right, pale and dry in the morning light, the scrub grass the color of old straw. Iamide was asleep against his arm. She'd gone out fast, the way children go out when they've been running on adrenaline and finally feel contained enough to let go. Her head was against his sleeve, the weight of it slight, her breathing slow and deep. He looked at her for a moment. Tell Jang I'll be at the meeting, he said. And find me a prosecutor, clean. No port authority connections, no task force links. I need someone who operates independently, who has a record of cases that went against the government rather than with it. Someone who understands that sometimes the machine eats its own. I have a name, Dae-sung said, which surprised him. Already? I started looking last night when you told me about the journalist, before you asked. A brief pause. Her name is Han Yi-won, Assistant Public Prosecutor, Busan District. She prosecuted 2 major corruption cases in the last 4 years. Both resulted in convictions against sitting officials. She was removed from a 3rd case 18 months ago. Officially restructuring, unofficially because the case was getting close to someone with connections to the Ministry Oversight Committee. She has reason to be angry, Yeol said. She has reason and she has skill. She's also, from everything I can find, not reachable. No unusual financial patterns, no connections to the private sector, no social entanglements that suggest she's been positioned. Daesung paused. She's genuinely clean, Yul, which makes her rare enough to be slightly suspicious, but the record holds up. Get me a secure way to reach her. Not through our usual channels. Something clean on our side too. Hyun-suk's routing. Understood. He hung up. He looked out the window and thought about the council meeting at 4 p.m. and what it was going to cost him to walk into it and walk out with his hands still free. He thought about Jang Byung-cheol, who was 63 and had been maneuvering for structural power since before the question was relevant, and who had the kind of patience that came from having waited a long time for the right moment. He thought about whether this was the right moment. From Jang's perspective, yes, unambiguously. Yul had gone dark, moved resources without authorization, clearly acquired something with government heat attached to it, and was now making decisions that were going to cost the syndicate a supply line. From Jang's perspective, this was either a crisis or an opportunity. And Jang was the kind of man who only recognized one of those two things. The horse property was outside a small town in Hadding County, a ranch set back from the road behind a gate and a long gravel drive surrounded by dry hills and the occasional stand of oak. The family who nominally owned it were real, an elderly couple named Beck who had retired to Tonggyang 7 years ago, and who understood that the trust arrangement that paid their property taxes and maintenance also came with occasional periods of occupancy they were never told about and never asked about. The house was single-story, clean, smelling of cedar and mild disuse. For bedrooms, a large kitchen, a covered porch facing the hills. The horse paddock at the rear of the property was empty. Iamide woke up when the car stopped. She looked at the hills through the window, the dry golden-brown slopes, the stillness, and then looked at Yul. Horses, she said, reading the paddock. Not right now, he said. I like horses. I know. He didn't know. He'd said it automatically and then registered that he'd said it, and registered what it meant that he'd said it, the reflex to give a child something small and good to hold on to. She didn't call him on it. She just looked at the hills. They were inside and settled by 10:40 a.m. Sua ran the perimeter with her 2 operatives. Ji-hoon parked the car inside the detached barn. Yul sat at the kitchen table with his phone and a cup of coffee that Jean had made from what was in the cabinet. Instant, slightly stale, not worth drinking, but warm. And he worked through the logistics of what the next 6 hours were going to require. His phone rang at 11:17. The number was one of his council members, not Jang. Shin Dong-min, the youngest on the council at 44, quiet, competent, the one who ran the syndicate's legitimate business portfolio and who generally aligned with Yul on financial decisions because Yul's decisions had made them both considerably wealthier than the alternative. Dong-min, he said. I need to tell you something before 4. Dong-min's voice was low. He was calling from somewhere private. Yul could hear the particular acoustic quality of an enclosed space with no ambient noise. Jang came to me this morning. I know he didn't come to me about a vote. He paused. He came to me about something else. He told me he's been in communication with a government contact for the past 3 weeks. Someone who approached the syndicate through an intermediary about the port situation. Yul went very still. The coffee cup was in his hand. He set it down without looking at where he was setting it. Go on, he said. The contact told Jang that the port disruption, our 2 men, the evidence markers, that was not accidental. It was deliberate. They were sending a message. They wanted us to know they were aware of our operations at the port and they were offering. Dong-min paused. Jang called it an accommodation. He said the word with a careful blankness that meant he'd chosen it specifically to avoid saying what it actually was. In exchange for the syndicate pulling back from certain cargo routing operations, they would guarantee our other operations at the port continued without interference. Yul's hand was flat on the table now. He became aware of it, the spread of his fingers, the pressure against the wood. Jang accepted this accommodation, he said. It was not a question. 3 weeks ago, Dong-min said. Verbally, no documentation. He told the other council members it was a temporary pause for strategic reasons. He didn't tell them about the contact. A pause. He didn't tell you. The room was very quiet. Through the kitchen window, Yul could see the dry hills in the middle distance, the sky pale and flat above them. He could hear Iamide in the other room, the small sounds of her moving around, opening something, the low sound of her talking to herself the way children do when they're alone. "He's known about this task force for 3 weeks, Yul said. "Yes, and when I came in last night with the chip, he would have understood immediately what it was," Dongmin said. "And what it would do to the accommodation." Yul thought about Jang calling Sua at 6 in the morning, about the council motion being pre-built before anyone had a meeting, about the speed of it, the coordination, the alignment of 3 votes before Yul was even awake enough to see the shape of what was happening. "Dongmin," he said. "The 2 men we lost at the port 3 weeks ago." Silence. "Dongmin." The contact told Jang, Dongmin said carefully, that the 2 men had been identified as a liability to the accommodation, that their removal was, the word used was necessary. The word landed. Yul's 2 men dead in a container yard with government evidence markers on them before the first call came in. He'd thought that meant the task force had moved faster than his people. He'd been right about that. He'd been wrong about why. They hadn't moved faster. They'd moved first. They'd known exactly where to be and when to be there because someone had told them. "Jang gave them up," Yul said. Dongmin didn't answer, which was its own answer. Yul sat with it for a moment. 2 men who had worked for the Jinyong group. Men he'd known by name, whose families he'd made certain arrangements for in the way that his world made arrangements for such things. Dead because Jang Byung-cheol had traded them for a phone call with a government contact who ran a trafficking operation behind a task force badge. He became aware that his jaw was aching. He'd been clenching it. "Thank you," he said to Dongmin. His voice was flat. He made it flat deliberately. "Yul, what are you going to do it for?" "What I need to do," he said. He hung up. He sat for a moment without moving. Then he stood up and walked to the kitchen counter and put both hands on the edge of it and breathed 3 breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. An old technique. He'd learned it from a man who was dead now, who'd told him that when you can't run and you can't fight yet, you breathe, because breathing is the only thing that buys you the time to figure out what comes next. The cost of the chip had just changed. He'd understood going into this morning that moving against Co-16 network would damage the syndicate's port operations. That was a business cost, significant, survivable, the kind of loss that could be absorbed over time. He'd been prepared to absorb it. He had not been prepared for Jang. Jang changed the geometry completely, because Jang wasn't just a council member who disagreed with Yul's choices. Jang was a man who had established a back channel with the exact people Yul was now building a case against. Which meant that whatever Yul brought to the council meeting at 4 p.m., Jang already knew about it or would know about it within the hour, which meant the council meeting was not a meeting. It was a handoff. Jang was going to use the 4 p.m. session to find out exactly what Yul had and then pass it to his government contact. And if he could use the council's bylaws to strip Yul's operational authority in the process, the chip and the girl and the entire play became a syndicate asset that Jang could negotiate with directly. Yul pushed off the counter. He walked to the room where Jean was stationed and knocked once. "I need you to go back to the city," he said when Jean opened the door. "Not Jihoon, you. I need eyes on Jang Byung-cheol from this moment until 4 p.m. His location, his calls, his meetings. Anyone he meets with in person gets photographed. Can you do that without being made?" "Yes," Jean said. "Go now." Jean went. Yul stood in the hallway and thought. Sua appeared from the direction of the back porch. "Perimeter's clean," she said. "I've got coverage on the access road in the rear. If anyone runs the drive, we have 4 minutes warning minimum." She read his face. Something happened. Jang gave up our men at the port. She went very still. "Say that again." He said it again briefly with the details Dongmin had provided. He watched her absorb it, watched the specific way it moved through her. Not just surprise, but something more structural, the wobble that happens when a load-bearing assumption turns out to have been false for longer than you knew. "He's been talking to KO's people," she said, "for 3 weeks. And the meeting at 4 is a mechanism to get what you have and immobilize you at the same time." She paused. "Which means you can't go. If I don't go, the motion passes by default. I know. They strip my authority formally by the bylaws. I know." She looked at him. Her mouth was slightly open, not from shock. She didn't do shock, but from the calculation of what he was saying, running slightly ahead of what she'd expected to be calculating today. You're going to let it pass. If I walk in there, Jang knows everything I know before Han does. Yul, if you don't walk in there, you lose the council. Yes. You lose the syndicate. He looked at her steadily. I know what I lose, Sua. She held the look. He could see her running it, calculating what it meant for her, for the people under her command, for the structure they'd both operated inside for a decade and a half. He watched her land on it, watched the moment she made her own decision, separate from his, which was the only kind of decision he'd ever respected from her. Okay, she said, came out quieter than usual. Then we need to move before 4 because once the motion passes, Jang will have grounds to pull resources, security, safe houses, the networks. I know. I need to reach Han before that happens. Hyunsuk's routing takes a couple of hours to set up clean. I know. He checked the time. 12:40 p.m. 3 hours and 20 minutes before the council meeting started. Get Hyunsuk on the phone. Tell him to start the routing now and pull Jihoon up here from the barn. I need him available. She was already moving. Yul walked back to the kitchen. Iamide was sitting at the kitchen table now, the backpack in front of her. She had taken something out of it. A photograph, physical, printed, the kind nobody printed anymore. She was looking at it. He sat down across from her without being invited. She turned the photograph to face him. A man, 38 or so, lean, dark-skinned, with a wide smile that reached his eyes and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was sitting in what looked like a kitchen, a different kitchen, warm-lit, lived in, with something pinned to the refrigerator behind him that was too small to read. He was looking at the camera and laughing at something that had happened just before the shutter. That's my dad, Iamide said. Yul looked at the photograph for a long moment. He looks like someone who laughs a lot, he said. He does. Present tense. She didn't correct it this time. He's funny. He makes up voices for animals. He does this whole thing where the neighbor's cat is a retired detective. She looked at the photograph. It's stupid, but it's really funny. Yul said nothing. I want you to see him, she said. I don't want him to just be the dead journalist. She said dead without flinching, with the directness of a child who has made herself say the true word because the alternative is worse. He's funny and he eats too much rice with everything and he can't whistle and She stopped. Her throat moved. He wrote the most important story and I want people to know it was him. Yul looked at her. They'll know, he said. Promise me. He held her gaze. He was not a man who made promises carelessly. He'd learned what they cost too early in his life for that. He made them rarely and he kept them completely. I promise, he said. She looked at him for one more second. Then she turned the photograph back and looked at it herself. And there was something in her face. Not peace, not comfort. Something more like a kind of terrible and absolute resolve that made her look for just a moment not 7 at all. His phone buzzed. Hyunsuk. A message. Routing live. Channel open. Han's secure contact active for a 6-hour window before it collapses. Yul typed his response to Han's channel while sitting at the kitchen table, composing it in the controlled, stripped-down language of a person who knew the communication was clean but had the habit of treating every communication as if it might not be. He told her who he was. He did not use the name Jinyong. He said, I have evidence in the form of an encrypted chip and complete file copies documenting a government task force operating a trafficking network through Port of Busan cargo operations for at least 7 years. The evidence was compiled by Adiwale Adeyemi. He's dead. I have his daughter. I am not seeking immunity, protection, or negotiation. I'm seeking an honest prosecutor who will take this to a grand jury and not route it through any channel connected to the Strategic Coordination Office. If you're that prosecutor, respond to this channel within 4 hours. He sent it. He put the phone in his pocket. Iamide was asleep on the couch again. He didn't know how she kept doing that, the dropping into sleep at will, the absolute surrender to unconsciousness in the middle of crisis conditions. He supposed it was a child's body doing what it needed to do regardless of what the situation was asking for. He envied it briefly and sincerely. The place he was taking them next was a property in the hills above Sanching. It had belonged to a man named Ha Won-suk, who had died 6 years ago and left it to Yul in a will Yul had not expected and had not publicized and had not sold, out of some combination of sentiment and operational instinct he'd never fully examined. Won-suk had been his mother's brother, not a syndicate man, not connected to anything Jinyong, just an old man who'd built a small house on a lot with a view of the valley and grown persimmons on a south-facing slope and died of a heart attack at 78 while watching television. The property was in Yul's personal name through a private trust that predated Jinyong by 12 years. It was, as far as he could determine, the only thing in his life that was entirely clean. They arrived at 2:11 p.m. The house was small, 2 rooms, a kitchen, a porch facing west, where the valley opened up below in a wide, flat spread of afternoon light. The persimmon trees on the slope were bare in November, the small hard fruit still clinging to the upper branches like decorations. Inside, the air was cold and still with the specific quality of an unoccupied space. Not musty, just waiting. Yul turned the heat on, found 2 blankets in a cedar chest, and put one on the couch for Iamide. Ji-hoon did a perimeter walk without being asked and came back and stood near the door, which was his way of being present without being intrusive, a quality Yul had valued in him for 9 years. Iamide walked to the west-facing window and looked at the valley. "It's pretty," she said. "Yes." "Whose house is it?" "Mine," he said. "Only mine." She turned from the window. Something in how he'd said it seemed to register with her, the specific weight of only mine, the distinction it carried. She looked at him with those evaluating eyes. "You don't have family," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not anymore." "What happened?" He was quiet for a moment. He could have deflected. He didn't. "My mother died when I was 26. I was already in the syndicate by then. She knew what I'd become, and she didn't have a clean way to hold both things, what she knew about me, and what she needed to believe about me." He paused. "She managed it until she couldn't. Then she got sick. I think the not managing took more out of her than the sickness did." He looked at the window. "I have no one left who knew me before." Iamide was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. A 7-year-old who had lost her father 16 hours ago, offering condolences for a grief he was still carrying after 15 years. He didn't know what to do with that except accept it. "Thank you," he said. His phone buzzed. Han Yi-won. The message was 4 lines. He read it standing in the middle of his dead uncle's kitchen, with the heat coming on and the valley light falling through the west window. "I know who you are. I know what the Jinyong Group is. I spent 18 months building a case that kept getting shut down from above. And 6 months ago I finally understood why it kept getting shut down. If the evidence is what you say it is, I don't care where it came from. Tell me where to receive it and tell me the girl is safe." He typed back. "She's safe. I'll send the files through this channel within the hour. The original chip follows through a courier route I'll specify. Be aware there is a motion being proposed at 4 p.m. today that will attempt to recategorize this evidence as a syndicate asset under negotiation. If that motion completes, the evidence may be offered directly to the people it implicates. You need to move before that. Send." He looked at the time. 2:27 p.m., 93 minutes until 4 p.m. He called Dae-sung. "The file transfer," he said. "Hyun-suk's channel. I need it going to Han's secure address right now. I need 30 minutes to package it properly so it arrives intact." Dae-sung said, "You have 20. And Dae-sung." He paused. "The 2 men we lost at the port. Baek Min-cheol and Song Jae-won. A beat." "Yes. Their families. Whatever the standard provision is, double it, and make sure it's processed before 4 p.m., before anyone can freeze syndicate accounts." Dae-sung was quiet for a moment. Yul could hear him breathing. "You're not coming back from this?" Dae-sung said. "Not as an accusation, as a statement of arithmetic." "Not the way I went in," Yul said. Another beat. "The files will be with Han in 20 minutes, Dae-sung said. Yul hung up. His phone rang 4 minutes later. Not a message, a call. The number was Jang Byung-cheol's. He answered it. "Yul." Zhang's voice was the voice of a man in his 60s who had spent 40 years being the second most important person in every room and had learned to make that sound like wisdom, measured, almost warm. The voice of a man who wanted you to believe the conversation was going to be reasonable right up until the moment it wasn't. I think we should talk before 4. We're talking, Yul said. I mean in person. No. A pause. You've heard things, Zhang said. Yes. People say things when they're trying to position themselves. Things get distorted. Zhang. Yul's voice was very flat. Baek Min-cheol and Song Jae-won. Silence. Say their names, Yul said. Yul. Say their names. The silence stretched. When Zhang spoke again, the warmth was gone. What was underneath it was not exactly cold. It was the particular temperature of a man who had done the calculation and was now simply on the other side of it. What's done is done, Zhang said. The accommodation protected the syndicate. 2 men against the stability of everything we've built. That's not a difficult calculation. You made that calculation without the council, Yul said. Without me. Because you would have made the wrong choice, Zhang said. Because you have always confused personal sentiment with strategic thinking. A journalist and his child are not the syndicate's problem. A task force with leverage over our port operations is the syndicate's problem. I solved the problem. You handed 2 of our people to government operators running a trafficking network, Yul said. You call that solving. I call it survival. Zhang's voice was steady, completely steady. The chip, Yul. Whatever is on it, whatever you've been doing since last night, it ends now. Give the chip to Ji-hoon. Tell him to bring it to me. The girl goes back to the people who are looking for her, and we return to the accommodation, and this entire situation becomes something that didn't happen. Yul looked at Iamide. She was on the couch with the blanket, listening. She'd been listening the whole time. She was 7 years old, and she was listening to a man argue for her being handed back to the people who had killed her father. Her face was doing what it did, the controlled stillness, the chin held level, the dark eyes taking it all in and processing it and not breaking. She met his eyes. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. No, Yul said into the phone. Then you're finished, Zhang said. The vote passes at 4. By 5, your authority is suspended. By 6, every asset, every account, every resource the syndicate has built is under council authority. You'll have nothing. Then I'll have nothing, Yul said. A pause. When Zhang spoke again, the voice had changed a final time, shed the last pretense of the reasonable man, arrived at something simpler and more final. There are people who will come to that house, Zhang said. I don't know exactly which house, but they'll find it. And when they do, the only question is whether you make this simple or whether you make it difficult. Tell them to come, Yul said. I'll be here. He hung up. He looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon was already moving, checking the door, checking the window facing the driveway, his hand at his side where the weapon was. Yul looked at Iamide. Come with me, he said. He took her to the back room, the smaller of the 2, a bedroom with a low window that faced the persimmon slope. He opened the window. Cold air, the smell of dry hillside, the pale afternoon light. If something happens, he said, you go out this window and you go up the slope, not down. There's a fire road at the top, runs east. You follow it east until you find a house and you call for help, and you say your name and you say there's a prosecutor named Han Yi-won who needs to know you're safe. Can you say that back to me? She said it back to him. Exactly. The name, the instruction, the direction, word for word. Good, he said. Are they coming? She said. Maybe. I don't know how fast. He crouched down to her eye level. His knees ached. He'd been on his feet for 31 hours. Everything ached. There was a particular quality to the exhaustion of this kind of extended operation that he'd felt before. It came through the bones rather than the muscles, a deep vibration of the kind that no amount of sleep fully fixed. He ignored it. But I need to know you know what to do. She looked at him this close, eye to eye. She looked older than 7, and very much exactly 7 simultaneously. The determined set of her jaw, the slight tremble she was controlling at the corner of her mouth, the darkness in her eyes that was not fear but was something fear-adjacent, something closer to the specific courage of someone who understands the situation and is choosing not to let it win. "Yul," she said. "Yes. You're not going to let them take me." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "Okay." She sat down on the floor beneath the window with her back against the wall and the backpack in her lap. "Ready?" He looked at her for one more second, then stood up and went back to the front room. Ji-hoon was at the window. "Vehicle," he said. "Low, quiet. Access road. 2 minutes out." Yul checked the time. 2:58 p.m. They'd found the property in 47 minutes. He thought about how Sua had run it in 4 seconds. The only people who knew he was connected to Ha Won-suk's property were Dae-sung, whom he trusted, whose entire morning had been spent building the case against Jang, and anyone who had access to Yul's personal trust documentation, which was a private filing, not a syndicate record, filed with an estate attorney 12 years ago through a law firm that also handled, on the corporate side, certain Jinyang structural documents. Jang Byung-cheol had been on the council for 12 years. He had access to the law firm. He'd probably had access to this address for years and had simply never needed to use it before. Yul let the last of the illusions go. "How many?" he said to Ji-hoon. "One vehicle visible, probably 2. One coming from the east on the fire road." Ji-hoon's voice was completely even. It was the voice of a man who had been in these situations before and had survived them through a combination of competence and the particular absence of panic that comes from having accepted a long time ago that these situations would keep arriving. 4, maybe 6 people total. Yul nodded. He reached into his jacket, took out the small metal case containing the chip, looked at it for a second. The size of a matchbox, the weight of nothing, the thing Adewale Adeyemi had hidden in his daughter's hair and died for. He typed a single message to Han. "The original chip is in a case at a property outside Sanching under the personal trust of Ha Yul. If I'm not reachable by 6 p.m., send retrieval to this address." He gave the coordinates. "The girl's name is Ayamide Adeyemi. She knows your name." He sent it. He put the case back against his sternum. He looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon looked back. "Ready," Yul said. "Been ready," Ji-hoon said. The vehicle on the access road had stopped. Through the window, Yul could see the nose of it just visible past the treeline, dark, heavy, the kind of vehicle that carried multiple people and was chosen for that reason rather than for comfort or speed. The driver had cut the engine, no doors opening yet, waiting, setting up on the far side simultaneously, which meant the fire road vehicle was positioning, running a 2-point approach coming from east and west, which meant they'd mapped the property, which meant they had more than 47 minutes on this, which meant Jang had started moving on this address before the 4 p.m. motion, before the phone call, possibly before this morning. Jang had known about this property for 12 years and had been sitting on it. Yul felt something cold move through him. Not fear, something more clarifying. The specific sensation of understanding the depth of a game he'd been in without knowing it. The front door of the dark vehicle opened. A man got out. Civilian clothes, official posture. The same controlled, deliberate movement he'd seen outside Namgang Sikdang last night in the rain. Then another door. Then another. 3 from that vehicle moving in spread formation toward the house, and through the back window Yul could already see movement on the slope, shapes coming down through the persimmon trees, 2 of them coming fast. 5 total, moving on a house with 2 defenders and a child in the back room. Yul breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth. The front man stopped 20 feet from the porch and raised his voice. "Mr. Ha, my name is Yoon Tae-hyun. I'm the operations director for the task force currently seeking return of material taken from a 7-year-old minor last night. I'm asking you to step outside and let's have a—" "I know who you are," Yul said through the door, his voice carrying. "I know what the task force is. I know what you move through those containers. And I know that right now there's a prosecutor who has 14 months of your documentation and is deciding what to do with it." Silence from outside. "So what happens next?" Yul continued. "Is up to you. You can come through that door and we'll find out how this goes. Or you can get back in your vehicle and understand that whatever window you had closed about 40 minutes ago, when those files landed." Another silence, longer. Then Yoon spoke again, and his voice had changed. The professional negotiator tone gone. Something more direct underneath it. the voice of a man deciding whether to believe a bluff or treat it as fact. The prosecutor has nothing without the original chip, he said. Files can be fabricated. Chains of custody matter. You know that. The chip's already spoken for, Yell said. By who? By someone you can't reach in the next 4 hours. Mr. Ha. Another shift. Something harder now, the last layer of professional courtesy coming off. The girl. She's 7 years old. Whatever her father found, whatever you think you're protecting, she doesn't need to be in the middle of this. Let her come out and this ends cleanly. Yul looked at Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon was watching the slope through the back window, tracking the two coming down through the trees. He held up 2 fingers, then made a motion, spreading them. They'd separated, coming at the back from 2 angles. Yul looked at the front door, looked at the hallway leading to the back room, where Iamide sat under the window with her backpack. He thought about how this was going to go. He'd run operations. He knew how this geometry worked. 2 points of entry, 5 trained operators, one of whom carried real government authority, which meant the legal and physical cover was complete. He and Ji-hoon could hold the front. The back was the problem. He had one move, and it was going to cost him something he couldn't get back. He reached into his jacket and took out the metal case and looked at it one more time. Then he walked down the hallway and knocked on the backroom door. Iamide opened it immediately. She'd been standing at the door. He held the case out to her. She looked at it. The chip, he said. Put it in your backpack. The inside pocket, all the way to the bottom, under everything else. She took it. Her small hands were steady. She unzipped the backpack without fumbling and put the case exactly where he'd said and zipped it back. There are men coming, he said. 2 of them up the slope. When I tell you, you go out that window, you go up. You find the fire road, you go east. You don't stop, you don't wait, you don't look back for me. She looked at him. Her chin was level. Her eyes were steady and very dark and full of something that was not a 7-year-old's thing to carry, but that she was carrying without being broken by it. What about you? She said. I'll be right behind you, he said. She looked at him for a long second. She knew he wasn't sure about that. He could see it in her face. She was 7.5, and she'd been reading the room accurately since the moment she walked into a restaurant in the rain and chose the right man by instinct, and she was reading him now just as accurately as she'd read everything else. Okay, she said, and the word did everything it had been doing all day, containing more than it said, holding more than it should have to hold for someone her age, choosing forward because there was no other direction left. Outside on the slope, a branch cracked. Yul turned. Now, he said, and Iamide Adeyemi went out the window into the cold November air, her backpack on her back, the chip inside it, her father's photograph inside that, running up the dry slope through the bare persimmon trees toward a fire road she'd never seen before, trusting the direction he'd given her. The way she'd trusted everything he'd told her since the moment she whispered 4 words to a stranger in a rainstorm. He turned from the window and walked back down the hallway. Ji-hoon was at the front door. He looked at Yul once, a look that contained a question and an answer and an acceptance of both simultaneously. Yul nodded, and Ji-hoon exhaled through his nose and turned back to the door. Yoon, Yul said through the wood. Outside, a pause. I'm here. The 2 men you sent up the slope. Call them back. A longer pause. Mr. Ha, there's a child on that slope. Yul said, she's running. If your men catch her, this ends one way. If you call them back and we talk, it ends another way. Those are the options. Silence. Yul listened. Through the back window he could hear footsteps on the dry hillside, the crunch of dead grass and loose shale moving fast, then slowing. Slowing. He couldn't tell if Yoon had signaled them or if they'd lost the sound of her. Then a voice from outside, not Yoon. A radio call close to the house. Words he couldn't fully make out. Then Yoon again. She's not on the slope, Yoon said. She made the road. Yul breathed one breath complete. The first clean breath he'd taken in 31 hours. Then there's no point in this, he said. He reached for the door handle. I'm coming out. Yul. Ji-hoon's voice was low. Stay inside, Yul said. If I go down, you call Shin Dong-min and you tell him everything. He has enough to work with. That's not. Ji-hoon. He looked at him. 9 years. The man had driven him in silence through more nights than he could count, and had never once asked for an explanation or a justification, and had simply been there in the particular way that some people are there, completely without performance. "Thank you," he said. Ji-hoon looked at him, nodded once, jaw tight. Yul opened the door. The late afternoon light hit him flat and pale, the sun low over the western hills. The valley below the property spread out in the long amber light of 3:30 p.m. in November. The kind of light that makes everything look both very beautiful and very final. Yoon Tae-hyun was standing on the gravel path that led to the porch. 45 or so, lean, the kind of fit that came from consistent physical maintenance rather than vanity. His face was the face of a man who had done this work long enough that the work had settled into his features and stayed there. A flatness around the eyes, a set to the jaw that was not cruelty exactly, but the structural result of having looked at certain things for certain lengths of time. 2 men flanked him at a distance. The 2 from the slope were coming down around the side of the house, rejoining the formation. 5 total, as Ji-hoon had counted. Yoon looked at Yul. "The chip," he said. "The chip is gone," Yul said. "The girl has it. The girl is gone. So, yes." Yoon's jaw moved. Something passed through his eyes, a calculation running, adjusting, the tactical mind processing the new information and its implications. His hand was at his side, not on a weapon but near enough. "What did you send the prosecutor?" he said. "Everything. Files can be. I know what you're going to say. Files can be challenged. Chain of custody. I know the argument." Yul looked at him steadily. "But the argument takes time. And while your lawyers are making it, there's a grand jury looking at 14 months of shipping manifests with your operational signatures on them. There's an audio file. There's a video." He paused. Adewale Adeyemi was very thorough. Yoon's expression didn't change. It didn't need to. The flatness around his eyes deepened by a degree that was almost imperceptible and entirely visible. "Where does this end?" Yoon said. "For you. I don't know yet. That's the prosecutor's problem." Yul looked at him. "For the network, tonight, the port operations, the containers, the children you've been moving. That ends tonight. You think one prosecutor and a dead journalist's files. I think," Yul said, "that you came to this house with 5 people instead of 50, which means you don't have authorization for 50, which means someone above you doesn't know you're here, which means Co sent you off the books because the official response to this would require explaining what the task force actually does. And that explanation goes places Co can't afford to go." He let that sit for a second. "You're alone, Yoon. Same as me, except I made peace with that this morning. And you're still pretending you have options." The 2 men from the slope had reached the flanking positions. 5 people spread across a 20-foot arc in front of the house. The geometry was what it was. Yoon took a step forward. Yul didn't move. "The chip surfaces," Yoon said quietly. "And it names names. Those names have reach. That reach extends to things you care about. Your organization, your people, the infrastructure you've spent 15 years. "I know," Yul said. Yoon stopped. "I know what it costs," Yul said. "I've been calculating it since last night. I'm done calculating." He looked at Yoon with the specific flatness of a man who has made a decision that is past the point of being a decision and has become simply a fact. Do what you came here to do or get in your vehicle. Those are your options. Something shifted in Yoon's face. The calculation completed. Whatever it landed on, it landed hard and fast, and Yul saw it coming in the half-second before it happened. The slight shift of weight, the hand moving from beside the weapon to on it, and he moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean. It was not the kind of thing that looks the way it looks in a film, smooth and choreographed and without consequence. It was ugly and loud, and it cost. He took the first man's forearm across his shoulder and felt something pull in his neck that was going to be a problem for a week. He put the second man down with his elbow and felt the impact travel up through his shoulder into his back. The third man caught him across the ribs with something that was not a fist, and he felt the breath leave him entirely and spent 2 seconds that felt considerably longer in the specific hell of not being able to inhale. Ji-hoon came through the door. Later, Yul would not be able to reconstruct the exact sequence with precision. What he knew was that Ji-hoon had made a decision that was not the decision Yul had told him to make, and had made it without hesitation, and had been very effective. 2 of the 5 were down. 2 were running the risk-benefit of continuing the engagement against 2 opponents in a confined space and arriving at conclusions that slowed their decision-making. Yoon had a weapon out. Yul was on one knee on the gravel, breathing in the specific way of a person with at least one rib that was either broken or very badly bruised. Each inhale a managed negotiation with his own body. He looked up at Yoon. Yoon looked down at him. "The chip's gone," Yul said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "The prosecutor has the files. You shoot me and none of that changes. The only thing that changes is the charges against you." Yoon's hand was steady. His eyes were not. "How does this end?" Yul said again. "For you personally. Not the operation, because the operation is already done. I need you to understand that it was done when Ayamide walked into that restaurant. It was done when Adewale Adeyemi spent 14 months building a record you didn't know existed. It was already done." He looked at Yoon. "How this ends for you is whether you're the man who shot an unarmed person on a gravel driveway outside Sanching, or whether you're the man who picked up the phone." Silence. The 2 remaining standing operatives had gone very still. Yoon's weapon arm lowered by 2 degrees, then 5. Then it was pointing at the gravel. He stood there for a long moment with the weapon at his side and his face doing something that was very far from simple. Then he put the weapon in his jacket. He took out his phone. He looked at Yul one more time, a look that contained things Yul was not going to try to name, because some things in a man's face at a moment like that belong only to him. And then he looked at the phone and he made a call. Yul didn't hear who he called. He was busy getting to his feet, which took longer than he would have preferred and required Jihoon's hand at his elbow. And once he was upright he stood and breathed and let the rib situation present itself clearly and confirmed that it was bad but survivable, and filed that information away. He looked at the western hills. The sun was almost down. The light had gone from amber to the deep copper rose of last light, and the valley below was beginning to show its evening geometry. The grids of streets, the scattered glow of early lights coming on, the flat shimmer of a distant reservoir. Somewhere on a fire road to the east of that hillside, a 7-year-old girl was walking toward a house she didn't know yet. His phone rang. He answered it. "She's here." Han Yi-won's voice, controlled, professional, with something underneath it that she was also controlling. She walked out of the hills and knocked on a farmhouse door and asked to use their phone. She said your name and mine. A brief pause. "She's safe. She has the chip." Yul closed his eyes for 2 seconds. "Okay," he said. "Are you all right?" He thought about what all right meant in this context. "No," he said. "But I'm standing." "I need you to come in," Han said. "Voluntarily tonight. If you come in tonight and you come in clean, it changes the legal landscape significantly. If I have to come get you." "I know," he said. "I'll come in." He paused. "I need 1 hour first." A beat. 1 hour, she said. "Then I need you at the prosecutor's office in Busan." "I'll be there." He hung up. He looked at Yoon. Yoon was still on the phone, talking in a low monotone, his back half-turned. The 2 standing operatives were not looking at Yul, which was its own kind of answer about where things stood. The 2 on the ground were sitting up now, which meant nothing was permanently broken, which was about as good as this situation was going to get. "Jihoon," Yul said. Jihoon came to stand beside him. "Drive me somewhere first," Yul said. Jihoon looked at him, looked at his ribs. "Hospital after." "Yul." "After," he said. "1 stop, then I'll go." Jihoon held the look for a moment, then walked to the car. They drove back into the city in the last of the evening light, Yul in the passenger seat with one hand pressed flat against his ribs. Not because it helped, but because it gave the pain somewhere to report to. The drive was quiet. Jihoon drove the way he always drove, smooth, attentive, no wasted motion, and Yul watched the hills give way to valley floor, give way to the first density of the outskirts. And he thought about nothing in particular and everything in general, which was what happened when a person reached the far side of something enormous and hadn't yet found the language for what they were looking at. The stop he needed was near Jinjuziang Fortress, the same block, Namgang Sikdang. It was 6:43 p.m. when they pulled up. The restaurant was open, Wednesday evening. the tail end of the dinner service. Through the window he could see Mrs. Yang moving between tables with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had been doing the same thing for 30 years and expected to do it for 30 more. He got out of the car. He went inside. The restaurant smelled exactly as it had the night before. Doenjang and mackerel and pine floor cleaner, the soft overhead light, the 14 tables, the particular warmth of a small room that has had people eating and talking in it all evening. Mrs. Yang saw him. She saw the way he was moving, the careful management of the ribs, the neck, the general posture of a man who had been in a physical altercation in the last 3 hours and not entirely won it. She said nothing. She went to the kitchen and came back with a clean towel filled with ice and put it on the counter beside him without comment. He sat on a stool at the counter and held the ice against his ribs and looked at the third booth from the back. He'd sat there for 11 years, barley tea going cold, trying to think without anyone waiting for an answer, running from the ghosts he'd accumulated in the course of building something powerful out of materials that left marks. He'd been sitting there last night at 11 p.m. and the door had opened. He thought about the geometry of it, the specific accident of it, a different booth and she wouldn't have seen him first. A different restaurant and she'd have gone somewhere else. A different city, a different year, a different version of himself who'd been harder in the places he was still, despite everything, not entirely hard, and he'd have looked at a wet child in a rain slicker and calculated the exposure and made a different choice. The accident of it was terrifying. The nearness of the version of events in which none of this happened. He was glad he wasn't that version. Mrs. Yang put a cup of barley tea on the counter beside him, hot. He looked at it. The table last night, he said. The 200,000 won. I charged you for what you ordered, she said. A bowl of soup you didn't eat and a cup of tea. Mrs. Yang, that's 22,000 won. She said. Don't be dramatic. He looked at her. She was 67 and had known him since he was 29 and had the particular quality of people who have witnessed enough of a person's life to be unimpressed by most of it. Thank you, he said, for last night. She looked at him for a moment. The child, she said. She's safe. Yes. Mrs. Yang nodded. She refilled his tea without asking. She went back to her tables. He sat with the tea and the ice and the ribs and the quiet of the restaurant for 20 minutes. Then he took out his phone and made one more call. Han Yi-won answered on the second ring. I'm coming in, he said. 10 minutes. I'll be at the door, she said. He looked at the third booth from the back one more time. Then he put money on the counter, stood up carefully, and walked out. The prosecutor's office in Busan was lit up against the dark sky. Its windows the particular institutional yellow-white of a building that runs around the clock, regardless of what's happening outside it. Ji-hoon pulled to the curb and stopped and kept the engine running. Yeol sat for a moment. You don't have to wait, he said. I know, Ji-hoon said. Yeol looked at him. Ji-hoon was looking straight ahead, hands on the wheel, the way he looked when he was driving, except the car wasn't moving. Go home, Ji-hoon, Yeol said. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. What happens to you now? I don't know yet. Prosecutor Han says voluntary cooperation changes things. There's no guarantee of what it changes them to. He paused. The syndicate is the council's problem, Ji-hoon said. Not mine. A beat. I worked for you. Not for the council. Yeol nodded. He opened the car door. The cold night air came in. He stood up onto the sidewalk, the ribs sharp and immediate when he straightened, and he looked at the building. Ji-hoon, he said through the open door. Yes. You're a good man. I should have told you that before tonight. He closed the door. He walked into the building. Han Yi-won was at the security desk inside. 41, medium height, dark haircut practically, and the kind of stillness in her face that came from years in rooms where the stakes were high and composure was the only tool that worked in all of them. She looked at him for a moment as he came through the door, taking in the damage with professional matter-of-factness. You need a hospital, she said. After, he said. After, she agreed. She looked at him. The chip is in evidence. The files are in evidence. The grand jury convenes tomorrow morning. She paused. Ko Won-sik was taken into custody 40 minutes ago. His deputy and 3 of his operational staff within the last hour. Port Authority arrests are proceeding as we speak. She kept her voice level, factual, the way people deliver enormous things when they're trying not to let the enormity derail the conversation. It's moving. And Yoon, he said. Yoon called his actual supervisor, not KO's chain, from a driveway outside Sanching at approximately 3:40 p.m. He's been talking since then. Her mouth moved slightly. Apparently someone on a gravel driveway convinced him that his options were narrower than he'd been working with. Yul said nothing. And Jang Byung-cheol, Han said. His counsel motion passed at 4 p.m. as anticipated. By 4:30, he was trying to contact KO's office to negotiate the chip's return. She looked at him steadily. He's going to be indicted separately, accessory to a criminal enterprise operating under color of government authority. Yul absorbed this. The syndicate, 15 years of construction, the architecture of it, the legitimate businesses and the illegitimate ones, and the careful balance between them, all of it now in the hands of a council that had just passed a motion stripping his authority, half of whom were about to face their own legal exposure, the whole structure vibrating with the impact of what the last 20 hours had done to it. He let it go. Not easily, not without the specific gravity of understanding what it meant to let it go. But he let it go the way you let go of something when your hands are needed for something else, and you finally accept that you cannot hold both. The girl, he said. Han's expression changed. Something shifted in it. Not softness exactly, something more considered than that, the face of a person connecting to something that mattered beyond the case. She's with a family care coordinator right now. She asked about you. She paused. She said to tell you the elephants, remember? Yul stood very still. Elephants, Iamide had said. Sitting across from him in a restaurant booth in the rain. Her feet not reaching the floor, her braids dripping, her dark eyes taking everything in. Because they remember everything. He put one hand flat against his sternum, against the place where the metal case had been, now empty, now in evidence, the thing Adewale Adeyemi had hidden in his daughter's hair and died for. I want to see her, he said. I know, Han said. There's a process. She's a minor. There's going to be a guardian appointment, a placement review. She stopped, read his face. It's not tonight. I'm sorry. He nodded. He understood process. He'd spent 15 years working around it and inside it, and occasionally building his own version of it. He understood that it moved at its own pace for its own reasons, and that the reasons were not always wrong. Okay, he said. Han looked at him for a long moment. For what it's worth, she said. What you did. I'm not in the business of characterizing the person who did it. That's not my job. But the outcome. She stopped, started again. Adewale Adeyemi spent 14 months on this. He built something that should have been built by people with badges and resources and institutional authority, and those people were the problem instead of the solution. And he did it anyway, and he died for it. She held his gaze. You're the reason it didn't die with him. Yul said nothing for a moment. He died for his daughter, he said finally. Not for the case. The case was what he had to do. She was why he did it. He paused. Keep that distinction when you talk about him. And whatever comes next, who he was, why he did it, keep that clear. Han held his gaze. I will, she said. She meant it. He could tell, not because he trusted easily, had never been able to afford to, but because he'd spent a lifetime reading the difference between what people said and what they intended, and what she intended was sitting right at the surface of her face, uncomplicated, real. He said, let's do this. 10 years passed the way they do. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the accumulation of days that don't feel like anything individually and turn out to have been everything in aggregate. The way a scar doesn't form in an hour but in months of slow, unglamorous biology that results eventually in something permanent. The trial was the largest corruption prosecution in 2 decades. It ran for 14 months. It implicated 31 individuals across 4 provinces. It produced convictions in 27 of those cases. Ko Won-sik received a 43-year sentence. Yoon Tae-hyun, who had made that call from a gravel driveway and kept talking for 11 months, received a reduced sentence of 12 years in exchange for complete cooperation. Jang Byung-cheol received 18 years. The network, the containers, the manifests, the shell organizations, the children moved through cargo channels while the task force charged with finding them ran the operation, was dismantled piece by piece, the evidence presented in the precise, meticulous language of a dead journalist. 14 months of work. Adewale Adeyemi was awarded a posthumous International Press Freedom Prize. The citation described his work as an act of singular moral courage. The medal was accepted on his behalf by a girl who had not yet finished growing up when the work began, but who had grown up knowing every page of it the way some children know bedtime stories. Yul served 31 months in a correctional facility in South Gyeongsang. The voluntary cooperation, the civilian involvement, the nature of the assistance provided, Han had been right that it changed things. It did not make things easy. Nothing about the 31 months was easy. But he had understood, walking into that building in Busan, that easy was not the currency available to him and had not been for some time. He was released on a Tuesday in March. The facility's exit was a door that opened onto a parking lot, and the parking lot was ordinary. Sun-cracked asphalt, a chain-link fence, the flat sky overhead the color of faded denim. There was no one waiting. He'd asked for that specifically. He walked to the bus stop at the end of the block and rode the bus into the city and got off near the fortress and walked the rest of the way. He was 51. His neck still bothered him sometimes. The rib had healed correctly. The syndicate had not survived intact. What remained of the Jinyong Group after the indictments and the council's collapse and the 18 months of investigation that followed had reorganized under different leadership into something smaller and more cautious, and had operated without his involvement and without his name. He did not miss it in the way he'd expected to. He missed certain people. He missed Yang Dae-sung, who had served his own brief sentence and retired afterward to Jeju Island and sent Yul a letter once that was 3 lines long and said nothing directly and meant everything. He missed Ji-hoon, who had driven him to a prosecutor's office and gone home and was now, as far as Yul knew, driving for a legitimate car service and doing fine. He got a job. Not the kind that made use of what he'd built, something simpler. He worked for a wholesale food distributor, logistics coordination, driving and route management. It paid less in a month than he'd spent on lunches in his previous life. He found, to his own moderate surprise, that this did not ruin him. The work was concrete. The outcomes were visible. Boxes moved from one place to another and either arrived or they didn't, and if they didn't you found out why and fixed it. He was, in the most boring sense possible, at peace with it. He thought about Iamide. He thought about her continuously across the 31 months and the years after, not obsessively, not in the consuming way that suggests a person is trying to hold on to something, but consistently the way you think about a thing that matters. He'd received one letter, through Han, about 2 years into her placement with a family in Daegu. The letter was written in a child's handwriting that was already becoming less childlike around the edges. It said, "I started a book about my dad. I'm gonna finish it someday. I got a gold star in reading. I still like elephants best." He'd kept the letter. It was in the inside pocket of his jacket at all times, the paper worn soft at the folds. The day the trial ended, the last day, the final verdicts, the word guilty read 27 times in a courtroom in Busan, Yul was in Jeonju. He'd watched the coverage on his phone sitting in a small park near the river. And when the last verdict was read, he put the phone in his pocket and sat for a moment with the November light coming through the trees and the sound of the city around him doing what it always did. He went to Namgang Sikdang. He sat in the 3rd booth from the back. He ordered barley tea and let it go cold the way he always did. He didn't bring his phone out. He sat with no obligations and no agenda and no one waiting for an answer from him. And he thought about a Wednesday night 11 years ago when a wet child in a red rain slicker had walked through that door and chosen him the way you choose the thing that seems strong enough to hold, and had been right, more or less, with the caveat that strong enough to hold and unbreakable were not the same thing, and she had somehow known the difference at 7 years old. He thought about Adewale Adeyemi laughing at something just before a shutter closed, in a warm kitchen he'd never seen. He thought about a note written in a child's careful letters at the bottom of a man's last message. "Please help my dad." He hadn't been able to do that. He'd been able to do something else. He hoped it was enough. He had reason to believe it was. He was trying to make peace with the gap between what you attempt and what is possible, which was the work of a lifetime and not something that resolved cleanly. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't look at it. Then he did. A message from a number he didn't have stored, untraceable format, but not the threatening kind. The routing structure was different, cleaner, the kind a public prosecutor's office might use for personal communications they wanted kept separate from official channels. The message was 4 words and a punctuation mark. Guilty. All counts. HYW. He held the phone for a moment, then another message, same number, different sender signature. I told you he'd stop them. Yul looked at the message for a long time. Outside on the old market street, the city moved through its ordinary Wednesday evening. The delivery scooters, the neon bleeding color across the wet pavement, because it had started raining again without him noticing, the ordinary human traffic of people going places they needed to go. The restaurant smelled of doenjang and mackerel and pine floor cleaner. Mrs. Yang was doing something behind the counter. The soft sounds of end of day, the flat clatter of metal bowls being stacked. He was 51 years old and alone in a booth with a cup of cold tea and a message from a young woman who had been, once, a 7-year-old girl standing on her toes in a rainstorm, whispering a request that changed everything. He typed back. He did. Why, he sent it. He put the phone face down on the table. He looked at the door. He thought about what it cost and what it came to, and whether those two things balanced out. He did not arrive at a clean answer. He didn't think there was one. He thought there was just this, the continuation, the morning after the war, the ordinary Tuesday of existence that follows the extraordinary Wednesday of everything that matters. The city outside, and the tea gone cold, and the knowledge that a child who had needed something from him had grown into someone who needed nothing from him now except the knowledge that he was still there. He was still there. That was enough. Outside, the rain came down on the neon streets near the old fortress. The red, the blue, the gold, the colors bleeding together across the wet asphalt into something that didn't have a name, but that you recognized if you'd ever stood in the rain and needed someone to say yes without explanation. Yes without conditions. Yes because the alternative was not something you were willing to become. The door stayed closed. The tea stayed cold. Ha-Yul sat in the third booth from the back and breathed in the quiet of the only room in his life where no one was waiting for an answer. And for once in 30 years, he had nothing to figure out, nothing to survive, nothing to calculate or protect or dismantle or carry. Just this. Just here.